Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues. We're the most controversial rabbi on the internet. Rabbi, the man, Chaim Coffman. Welcome back. Don't smoke crack, Coffman. How are you? I lost my screen. See, that's what I get for talking. That's what I get for talking smack about you, I think. Let me fix this.
You disappeared. That's even better.
Hey, less of me for more of you, right?
It depends who's listening. Maybe they want more of you, less of me.
That's funny.
That's the way it goes.
Oh, gosh. That's hilarious. Okay, my friend. Well, hell, well. Did I just say that? I didn't mean well. Forget that. Just rewind,
All right,
ignore.
Let's start again.
Josh, welcome.
Let's start again.
Let's start over. All right. So we're on part 2. We'll probably close this one up. We'll have this one buttoned up probably by the end of the hour. So this is why can't converts take or have leadership roles? If you want to know the more specifics so you didn't have to do a lot of repeating, go back and watch last week's episode, because there's a lot of things in there that this title might confuse you on right off the bat. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there that would make more sense to you. So, Rabbi, go ahead and take it away. It is all yours.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here, as always. And we did mention last week we didn't really get to the main point, which is what we're going to discuss now, right, is the fact that, you know, when it comes to someone who converts, the Torah says, and this is really going to be the base of what we're going to speak about, that Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 15, right? The Torah tells me that you shall surely set up over yourself a king, who Hashem your God shall choose from among your brethren. Shall you set a king over yourself? Now, this is really the main part here, is that you cannot place over yourself a foreign man who is not your brother. Now, the obvious question is, a foreign man, right? Well, what about a convert? Isn't a convert considered your brother, right? And so we spoke about the blemished, the blemished genealogy, right? That's why converts can marry a mamzer, someone who's born from a forbidden union. It's either someone from the same union or a convert, right? And also a Kohen, cannot marry a convert. Again, it has to do with lineage, genealogy. Other people brought different things from Kabbalah, but what the issue is, in some ways we'll call it, for lack of a better term, maybe it's spiritual cooties, but there's an idea of something that's blemished, right? That the soul itself, as the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, he brings down that the soul itself is not the same, right? It's not the same as a Jew. It is blemished. They didn't accept the Torah Mount Sinai. By doing so, there are limitations, right? A Jew and a non-Jew are not going to go to the same place, right? A Jew has more obligations, right? We spoke about that, the chosen people. So that's by way of introduction. You can watch all that from last week. So now the question really is, okay, based on this verse, based on Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 15, right, there are two things going on. The first thing is God's going to choose a king from among your brethren. Now, a convert, technically, is a foreigner. Now, even though you're going to tell me a convert is the same as a Jew, can be on a higher level than a Jew after going through a proper conversion, well, that's true. But the question is, how are we going to look at the verse? Because then the Torah tells me you cannot place over yourself someone who's not your brother, and someone who's a foreigner, right? Said it backwards. Someone who's a foreign man who's not your brother. So now, even if they convert, they're 100% like a Jew, but there are some limitations. Now, someone, who's a convert is still considered in certain ways a foreigner. But the point is, at the beginning of the verse, the rabbis are going to learn out over here that in this case, having real power, a king who has real power today, there's really no such thing as kingship. There are really no kings out there, except maybe in a place, let's say, like Saudi Arabia. Now, a place like Saudi Arabia, the king can do what he wants. He wants to kill people, right? Many things that he can do. So he might really have the status of a king today. But in general, we're talking about real power. So in a case over here, so the rabbis learn So since a convert really is a stranger in a certain way, once they convert, nonetheless, there's a whole question over here. Can they have that same type of power? Can they have the same type of power like a king, right? Or let's say better, what are they necessarily limited to? Is it any type of power, right? Any type of leadership, right? That is going to be the question. So comes along the Bach, one of the commentaries on the Torah, Rabbi Joel Circus in the late 1600s, 1700s. He learns over here, what is this verse talking about? This verse says that it's speaking like a king, and a king has a position of power. So someone, technically, again, this is a technicality. We're not saying non-Jews that convert, they're scum of the earth, they can't do anything, and we're going to limit them totally, right? Someone will say, well, either they're part of the Jewish people, 100% or not. So the answer is, well, it depends. What does it depend on? It depends on, can they be a rabbinic court judge? We mentioned last week, right? They can judge another convert, right? When it comes to laws of, let's say, damages, laws of money, right? But only if their mother's not a Jew, they can judge another convert. If their mother is a Jew, then they can judge another Jew. But even if the mother wasn't Jewish and the son converted, so if two Jews come along and say, we want you part of this rabbinical court, we're willing to take on whatever you say because you have the requisite knowledge, that's okay, right? That would not be an issue because they're accepting upon themselves the responsibility. Question is, would a convert in general be allowed to sit on a rabbinical court for the sole reason to judge another Jew if their mother isn't a Jew? And that we say no, right? That we say no. But comes along the Bach, and the Bach says, just like a king had a position of power, someone who's not of your people. Now again, this is not, we're throwing out non-Jews. We're not saying non-Jews are scum of the earth and all that, even if they convert. What we're saying is the Torah tells me, again, let's see the verse, Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 15. You're not going to set over yourself a king from among your brethren, right? You cannot place over yourself a foreign man who's not your brother. Now, technically, based on a technicality, a non-Jew, in this case, is considered a foreigner. But when he converts, doesn't he have the status of a full-fledged Jew? In certain things, or many things he does. In other things, there's a question, right? Just like over here. The king cannot be someone who has true power like a king, cannot be from a foreigner, right? There's no question by Yanai the king, right? He cried when he came across these verses. He says, well, he can't be a king. Doesn't have proper lineage to be a king, right? I think I mentioned last week as well. I think the president of the United States to get elected cannot be a naturalized citizen. Has to be a full-bred American, right? Because it's not fair. Let's change it. Let's go back to the Constitution. Discriminate against any foreigner. Who became naturalized. Doesn't matter where they came from. Europe, the West Indies, anywhere, South America. They could have 120 IQ. They can have all the right connections. All the political connections. Doesn't matter. The law on the books is they cannot become president if that law is true, right? They cannot be presidents based on a technicality, right? It's not based on knowledge, not based on anything else. There's a law. The law says you want to be the king, you have to have quote-unquote pure blood, right? Probably wrong thing to say. Not going to be politically correct, right? But in the end, to be the president, you have to have pure American blood, right? You cannot be naturalized. You can't come from anywhere else. That's not going to help, right? So over here, we have a technicality. And the technicality is that you have to be from among your brethren. He's not among your brethren in this case. He's considered a foreigner. If he's considered a foreigner, what does the Torah tell me? Torah tells me he can't have the status of a king. What does it mean to have the status of a king? We could say it means 100% cannot be like the king in any way, shape, or form, right? Meaning he can't be a king in any way, right? Or meaning he can't be the king, right, in general. Or do we say, is it something similar to the king? What does the king do? The king wields power. He's got real power. He can expel people from the country. He can kill them, right? Just like the king in Saudi Arabia. He can do whatever he wants. He's got real power. 100% real power. So based on a technicality, the Torah tells me, okay, if he's a foreigner, he cannot have real consolidated power like a king. The technicality, right? But so the question now is, okay, if we're talking about a position of power, what level of power are we talking about? What type of position, right, are we talking about? Comes along, Moshe Rebbe, however, going to Moshe Sturmach Shlita, he should be well, and he brings in his response in Shuvas and Huggis. That's his book on question and answers. He answers all kinds of things from, all kinds of topics, and anyone wants to look it up. This is the third part, the 405th question, and he asks the following question. And he asks the question, can a convert be a rabbi of a synagogue? Can he lead a yeshiva? Can he be a ram in a yeshiva? I.e., can he give classes in a yeshiva as a teacher? So somebody in the chat last week asked, I got an obvious case, right? Obvious contradiction. What about Shammai and Avtalion? Shammai and Avtalion were what? They were converts, right? The rabbis, the Rebbe of Hillel, right? Think of Hillel. They were converts. Didn't it seem they had positions of power? Weren't they heads of a rabbinical court, right? That was a question, right, that someone asked, which I answered. We're going to get there, right? We're going to hit that now. It comes along the Rambam. The Rambam, in his introduction to his magnum opus, the Yad HaChazaka, which he discusses all the laws about damages, laws about marriage, laws about divorce, laws about the holidays, festivals, Shabbos, blessings, prayer, right? He's got a magnum opus. In his introduction, he mentions that Shmaya and Avtalion and their rabbinical court. They had a rabbinical court. Obvious question, how could they have done that? Right? So we'll see. What did they do? Was it a traditional rabbinical court as we would understand it? They're answering questions on the laws of damages, on money matters. They're answering questions, let's say, on kashrus. Maybe they're answering questions, death penalty, which they didn't really have the ability to do. He needed a rabbinical court of 23. The first Mishnah Sanhedrin tells us. Regardless, he says, Shmai and Avtalion and their rabbinical court. So first thing is, they had a rabbinical court. How could that have been? But what did they do? What did the rabbinical court do? Not what we would imagine. Not necessarily what we would think. He said their rabbinical court accepted traditions of the Torah. And accepting traditions of the Torah doesn't necessarily mean they're going into the intricacies of all the laws of damages and marriage. It could be they did, right? But what does the Rambam say? His language is very specific. The Rambam says they accepted traditions of the Torah. They organized it in their rabbinical court. They put them together. Right, so we understand, okay, if that's what they're doing, and these are things that might be obvious, if they're things they're not allowed to judge, even if it's 100% obvious, how could it be? How can it be if they're not allowed to sit on a rabbinical court in the first place? Even if you would tell me they were accepted traditions, they didn't decide any Jewish law. They didn't see people, their arguments and all that. So even so, if they had their own rabbinical court, how could they have done it? Right? That's the question. Right? That is the question. So now, when is it forbidden? When is it forbidden over here? Now, it's forbidden if they would have the status of, let's say, the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin themselves, 71 rabbis sat on the Sanhedrin. There were only certain cases, that they would decide. Could be cases of certainly of murder, to put people to death, to judge a tribe. There were certain things that only the Sanhedrin could do. Now, if it would have been something where they would have had to have that level of knowledge, right? To be something like the Sanhedrin and things that the Sanhedrin would judge. So in that case, we'd say that's forbidden, right? Or anything that is going to be similar, right? Anything that has a similar status, then that would be an issue, right? So now a person can say, but what if they were an expert? What if they had the status of an expert? So even if they were so we're going to deal with this, because even if they were a convert, but they were the best person for that position. In other words, not only did they have the requisite knowledge, but they were an expert in all fields, right? The laws of damages, marriage, kashrus, all these different things. They were world bona fide experts, in everything. Because today, as we mentioned last week, the idea of rabbinic ordination is a big joke. Why? In many ways. One way is a person can have rabbinic ordination in one subject. Let's say they pass a requisite exam in the laws of Shabbos, or in the laws of kashrus, or let's say in the laws of family purity laws, or let's say in the laws of mourning, or something like that. A person could have specialty in all of them, right? Could pass all those exams, or let's say they only have rabbinic ordination in one, right? There are people that may only have rabbinic ordination in one. The rabbinic ordination today, and compared to what they knew years ago, is a joke. It's a joke that the rabbis today still have the status, to have rabbinical courts to answer questions, if they have obviously the requisite knowledge, right? But when you're talking about the requisite knowledge way back when, we don't compare to their pinky, to their toenails, to the crust of their toenails, and what they knew. Because today, since we don't have the same type of rabbinic ordination, so we mentioned last week, just repeat this, we mentioned last week, there are only certain things they can judge, right? There are certain things that they can't judge because we don't have a tradition of people that have that rabbinic ordination from the time of the Second Temple. The Maharam Rutenberg in the 1100s wanted to reinstitute it, right? But he was going to write a whole response on it about reinstituting it, and in the end, it didn't go. Right? It didn't go. So we don't have that type of rabbinic ordination. So therefore, we're limited. We're limited in what we can judge and how we judge it. Because today, a rabbinical court judge, or all three of them, can only judge what we call pshara karav ladin. Pshara karav ladin means they make a compromise. Right? There's almost no such thing as judging it according to Torah law. The reason is because if it comes to, let's say, something like a kanas, giving someone a penalty, that you need a proper rabbinic ordination that we don't have. So if a rabbinical court sees it's going in that direction, they won't judge it, or they won't judge that aspect of it. So they're considered, the rabbinical courts today are considered like messengers, and therefore they can only judge certain things, right? So therefore, since they can only judge certain things, so it's called a compromise. It's not really standing on the letter of the law of the Torah because they don't have the ability to do that. Now, regardless of that, if it's something similar, like they would need to have the status of the Sanhedrin, so for a convert, so they're out. That would be problematic. They wouldn't be allowed to. So why over here that you have a rabbinical court of Shmaya and Avtalion, you have a rabbinical court where they accepted traditions of the Torah? Why is that not problematic? Why is that okay? Because over here, what are we talking about? We're talking about a rabbinical court that needs to be fitting. Why is it more forbidden? Let's answer that question first. Why is it forbidden? Because you need a rabbinical court to have the ability as well to give the death penalty. Right? They have to have certain level of ability to do certain things. So if that's the case, so we know, or if you don't know, you find out now, it's forbidden for a convert to sit on such a rabbinical court. That's going to be forbidden, right? In those type of cases. Now, person will say we don't do the death penalty today, right? We don't have a rabbinical court of 23. We certainly don't have a rabbinical court of 71. We don't have a temple in Jerusalem. Someone else is going to say, yeah, but the Mishnah in Makos 7a or 7b tells us that if the Sanhedrin the Jewish Supreme Court would have killed once in 7 years, would have been considered a bloody court. Some say if it would have killed once in 70 years, it would have been a bloody court. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and said, if I would have been there, they never would have killed anybody. It would have found loopholes across the board. So then what's the point? Then we could ask the question, okay, if no one ever really got killed, so then what's the whole point of death penalty in the Torah? Right? The Torah does tell me a number of times, right, for certain things they get the death penalty. Right? There are 4 corporate punishments. One is skila, the most severe, getting stoned, which means, let's say a person desecrated Shabbos on purpose. So what do? You warn him, and hopefully you get the right category. And if he says, I don't care, I'm going to do it, you take him up to a 3-story building, you push him off the building, you take him from the stomach, from that area, and you throw him down. Now, if that doesn't kill him, what do? You take a huge stone, you aim for the heart. So what do we say? We say if the left one doesn't get you, the right one will. That's one form of corporal punishment, desecration of Shabbos, homosexuality, right? Then you have sreifa, being burned. A person commits adultery. What did they do? They opened up your mouth real wide. They poured molten lead down your throat. Well, that you're gonna die, right? That's pretty clear. Then you had your head chopped off. That was another form of corporal punishment, and then you got choked to death. Right? They would take a rope, put it around your neck, and they would have horse go in either direction. You get choked to death. So there are 4 corporal punishments. The whole question is exactly what's the most severe. Point is that there is corporal punishment, or there was corporal punishment. Let's say better. There was corporal punishment, but the death penalty seemingly was never meted out because of technicalities, right? Many technicalities. So then someone will ask, okay, if it's so severe, if the penalty's so severe, why didn't they do it? See, if we were in charge, put on my George Burns glasses over here, put on my funny mustache, I'll play God over here, kill him, right? He deserves the death penalty. No, we don't want to kill anyone. We want to show ultimate mercy. But if he's liable for the death penalty, most people will say, okay, that's what he did. He's liable. If he's liable, so let him be killed. We have no problem obligating people, for that. Regardless, right? Very few people, if any, are actually killed. But it is interesting. It is brought down. I think the Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin brings down. I have to double check this, but it is brought down that the 4 corporal punishments, just as a side point, the 4 corporal punishments we don't have today, right? We don't have because we don't have a temple in Jerusalem, right? The way it was done, the way it should have been done. But today, corporal punishment still exists. How does it still exist? If a person, God forbid, dies in a car crash, right? They die in a head-on collision, whatever it is. They die in a car crash. Now, what is a car crash? Car crash in general is impact, right? Is impact, right? Most people are going to die, usually. Depending on how severe it is, probably die on impact or a little bit after. So impact can be considered like skila. How can it be considered like being stoned to death? Being thrown off a 3-story building, that's impact, right? It's a similar thing. Person, God forbid, dies in a fire, right? That could be sreifa. That could be the second category. Person drowns, could be being choked, right? It's a similar thing. Now, we don't understand how it works, right? We certainly can't fathom anyone, God forbid, who dies in any of these ways. A person cannot say 100%, 90%, 50%, we can't even say 5%, and say, oh, see, that person deserved the death penalty for who knows what, and that's why they're getting this. We don't know. Death also is an atonement. We have to understand, we're not going to, I want to get through this topic here, but death is also, it's also an atonement, even though Jewish people don't believe in death. Death never should have happened. Adam and Eve ate from the tree, etc. We're trying to get back to where the world was. Before that, the only time in history that was the case is by the giving of the Torah on Sinai. And then we got back to that point, except the evil inclination, Mr. S, said, oh, we can't do that. My job is over. I'm going to be destroyed over here. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he put up, the Medrash says, he put up an image of the Jewish people showing Moshe Rabbeinu in a coffin. They made a mistake. They thought he died. So they made the sin. They had the sin of the golden calf, and that brought the world back to where it was. But death is an atonement, right? It certainly can atone for many sins. One caveat is that if a person suffers, according to some commentaries, they have to acknowledge they're going through the suffering because it's an atonement. But essentially, death can atone for many, many things. So, in this case, a convert's not going to get up the bat, based in a rabbinical court of 23, certainly not of 71. Again, based on a technicality, but they have to be fitting for everything, which is an interesting thing because my Rebbe holds by, let's say, a rabbinical court for converts. The Rambam holds, and I had someone tell me this, that the Rambam holds I can take 3 kosher Jews that keep Shabbos. And if they keep Shabbos and a convert goes in front of them, technically that the conversion could be okay, right? It has to be judged on an individual basis, right? It shouldn't be done in general, but if it is done, then the question is, does it have validity or not? So really, it has to be judged on an individual basis. We're not going to throw it out and say, well, it shouldn't be done, and if it's done, then it's no good, right? And someone screamed to me day and night, says, but the Rambam, I can't move to a Jewish community. I'm living, in a certain place. We should all buy the Rambam. Again, you have to know how we go according to Jewish law. Just because the Rambam says it, we don't necessarily go 100% according to the Rambam. And even in this case, if you had 2 kosher Jews, technically it's okay, right? It should be okay. The problem is you have to see according to the case. So says Moy Rebbe, he says that a rabbinical court for conversion has to know other things also. They have to know the laws of damages, the laws of divorce. It cannot just be a rabbinical court just for the sake of conversion. So what do we mention? Right? So we said over here that the case is it has to be a rabbinical court fitting for everything. So for converts in general, for a convert to come in front of a rabbinical court, that rabbinical court cannot just be 3 kosher Jews. They have to know things about other things as well. About the laws of damages, marriage, divorce, etc. Right? So that's one possible answer that the Rambam says by the converts of Shmai and Naftalion and their rabbinical court. Now comes along the Mishnah Chagiga, Tractate Chagiga, Chapter 2, answers that they really weren't a rabbinical court. Who was one of them? He says was the Nasi, right? What is the Nasi? The Nasi, for lack of a better term, was called the exilarch, right? He had a certain level of power, right? Also had a certain level of power. Over here, he was the one in charge of the Sanhedrin, and the other was the head of the rabbinical court. Now, it doesn't mean they necessarily sat on the rabbinical court. One was sort of in charge, right? One was the head of it, right? So now you'll say, but isn't that a leadership position? That should be a leadership position. Should be should be forbidden over here. So the question here is, so why did they have that position? If they're not allowed to have a position of power, then the obvious question, according to the Mishnah, is, okay, you want to tell me that one of them was the exilarch of the Sanhedrin. You want to tell me it was a political position, right? You want to tell me the other one was the head of the rabbinical court. Again, if it's a leadership position, 100% should be forbidden. So what's going on over here? So now the question is, maybe it's permitted because here by the Sanhedrin, they're choosing the best ones. In other words, they're choosing the cream of the crop. Even though you might tell me they should be disqualified by a technicality. But if they are the greatest rabbis of that generation, then we throw this out the window. Then you're right, it is a technicality. Really, they shouldn't be leading over here. But even if you tell me that, what if they're the most qualified to do so? If they're the most qualified to do so, then we shouldn't have an issue. Why? Because they have the status of being experts. If they have the status about being experts, forget about the technicality, right? Knock out the technicality. Shouldn't matter, right? But what do we say over here? The Rambam mentioned the accepted traditions of the Torah, right? So giving over traditions of the Torah, really anybody can do that if they have the requisite knowledge, right? It's not like they're taking these intricate cases and they're deciding, life and death, damages, marriage, divorce, other things. We're not talking about that. These things are revealed to everyone, right? So everyone can have this knowledge. So if everyone can have this knowledge, what are they really doing? They're just giving over things that are obvious. Now, it has to come with a certain level of knowledge. But if it's obvious to most people, i.e. most people who know how to learn or whatever, then anybody can do it, right? Anybody should be able to do it as long as they have that requisite knowledge and it's something that's obvious, right? It's something that's revealed to everyone. So if it's revealed to everyone, there is no discrimination. We'll take anybody. Doesn't matter, right? It's irrelevant. We don't need this, we don't need this verse over here to tell me it's leadership or not. There's something anyone can do, right? So then you can choose from one of the Torah giants, right, of that generation who's fitting to do so. So the technicality, we'll say, goes out the window. Someone could be a stickler and say, but a technicality is a technicality. How in the world can you overrule it? So in this case, it's something that's revealed to everyone. If it's revealed to anyone, you take the best. It doesn't matter who they are, but it's revealed to anyone, right? And today, I'll just throw this out there. Today, you have, let's say, people sitting and learning. They might not have rabbinic ordination. They're learning. Let's say they learned in yeshiva for a number of years. They go back to their home countries. They get involved in business, other things. We have to understand people sitting and learning have a certain level of knowledge, right? That level of knowledge, whether called rabbi or not, doesn't matter, right? That level of knowledge should be respected, right? If it obviously deserves to be respected. But, sometimes people think, okay, I learned 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, whatever. I don't have a position. I'm not a YouTube rabbi. I'm not the most controversial rabbi on the internet. I don't have a position, right? Says Rabbi Chaim Coffman, but you're holding up the world. Rabbi Chaim Coffman headed up the rabbinical court in London. He was one of the Torah giants of the last generation. And he said people sitting and learning, sometimes they don't have a position, or they don't give classes or whatever. And, they don't have such great self-esteem. So, I'm only sitting and learning. What does the first mission, Perkei Avos, say? Torah upholds the world. It absolutely upholds the world. Why should you think anything less? What do you care? You have a position. You don't have a position. Right? What difference does it make? But today, what do we give credibility to? Oh, look, he's got rabbinic ordination. He's giving classes. He's doing this. He's doing that. He's taking people off, whatever it is. Right? But people feel that prestige. They feel that, they feel that they're doing something. They're accomplishing, when the reality is people sitting and learning are upholding the world. They're absolutely upholding the world. Someone say, it's apologetics. Come on, okay, he learns. What does he really know? How much in depth? This, that, and it doesn't matter, right? That's not really the point. The point is they're upholding the world. They deserve respect. Yeshiva students deserve respect. 14, 15, 16, look what they're giving up their life to do, right? 14, 15 hours a day, 12 hours a day. They're learning like fire. That's how Torah gets passed down to the next generation. Problem is, people poo-poo it, and they say, he's not really doing anything. He's not doing anything for the world. Imagine there was a story. I heard a great rabbi once say, right? He knew somebody that was, doing something important for the world, just writing a book on tax law, right? Got plenty of money from the government, got an apartment, paid their rent, got spending money. They didn't call this person a parasite. They didn't say he's not doing anything for the world. He's not upholding the world. He's writing a book on tax law. I can't imagine what that does for the world. Maybe it does. I could be wrong. No, I have nothing against lawyers or tax law, right? But people give such credibility to things that have no relevance. They don't have so much relevance, right? To the, in the spiritual world. So this person, couple years, getting everything paid for, food, expenses, an apartment. Oh, they don't say this person's a sponge. Like they'll say a yeshiva student is who's married. Oh, he's not doing anything. What a waste. All this and all that. What's he doing? He's writing a book on tax law. right? That's what's really important. But yeshiva students, obviously they need to be praised, right? You see what they do on a daily basis, not easy. I always tell people, you want to do what I do? You want to sit 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day, break your head on certain things? Yeah, not so easy, right? It's really not so prestigious either, right? In a certain way, but certainly we believe they're holding up the world. Oh, you want a position also, etc. You want to feel like you're doing something? Why do you have to feel you need a position? If it's all about you're holding up the world, but I don't want to digress here. So if you have someone who's one of the Torah giants of the generation, doesn't matter what his status is, right? Doesn't matter if he's a convert or not. You choose him, right? That's not an issue. That's what we're talking about. One of the early commentaries, the Rival, one of the Bali Tosfos in 1300, or actually earlier than that, about the 1000s, 900s, 1000s, something like that. The Rival brings down in Parsha Shoftim, right? A book in Deuteronomy says that if there's no one better than them, he says clear, there's no one who's got more knowledge, then they can do this. Not only that, they be allowed to judge monetary matters as well. The Code of Jewish Law says only if their mother's a Jew can they decide matters of Jewish law when it comes to money, or maybe other things as well. But we mentioned if, two people have an argument, they come in front of this person, they accept him, that's okay, right? But in this case, comes along the Rivad and he says, you know what? If they're the most qualified, or even if they're not the most qualified, they're qualified enough, right? You can go to them, right? That is not going to be an issue. That will not be an issue. So then the question is, okay, my Rebbe goes to the question now, what about teaching in the yeshiva? Isn't teaching in the yeshiva also a position of authority? And that should be forbidden, right? So when is it forbidden over here that it's going to be a position of authority, right? What's this person doing? This person is giving classes, right? He's a Ram in the yeshiva. He gives classes, right? He gives Talmudic classes, maybe speaks in Musar, other thing, in ethics, whatever it is. He gives classes. He's a teacher, right? Essentially what a rabbi is. He's a teacher. Now, if he's giving classes, right, you might say, well, it's only forbidden if it's a position of authority, right? But he's giving classes over here, right? If he's giving classes over here, then that should be okay. Now, why? Why should it be okay? So my Rebbe says, you know why? Because they have the requisite knowledge and because of their fear of heaven. Because a person like this who's going to teach the children or older children, whoever it is, they have to look up to them like they're an angel. Just like we say, as the Talmud brings down, that a person cannot learn under a rabbi unless he's like an angel to them, right? No, that doesn't mean they're perfect, but he has to look at them like they're an angel. But it means that they have proper fear of heaven, right? And they have the requisite knowledge. So it's not about a position, Rabbi says, of necessarily of authority. It might be some level of authority, but the reality is, it's because of their knowledge. It's because of their fear of heaven. Others say, even if it's not, so he brings down a difference of opinion, that even if it's not a position of authority, still going to be forbidden, right? So some are going to say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he has true power. He doesn't have true, even if you want to say he's just giving classes based on knowledge, the reality is a position of power. And the fact that the position of power, we don't just throw this out. We don't throw out this technicality. We're going to see, we'll see something by Moshe Feinstein in a second, what he does with it. But a very interesting thing. So we have a difference of opinion. Difference of opinion whether it is a position of authority, even if it's not, whether it's permitted or not. Right? So that is the question of someone who teaches in the yeshiva. What about a position of what about a rabbi of a synagogue? Right? What is the position of a rabbi in the synagogue? Right? Essentially, it's to give sermons, to give guidance, right? And answer questions, to decide Jewish law. But what also do they do? What also do they do? They lead. right? It's a position of leadership. So also should be forbidden. So the question would be, if you have two people qualified for the same position as the rabbi of a synagogue, and the rabbi, and one of them is a born Jew, the other is a convert. So here my Rebbe says, better to take a born Jew, right? Because it really is a position of leadership. Now, there's another issue, right? There's a whole nother issue, which I'm not going to go into so much. But there is an important issue that there is inheritance by a rabbi. Now, what does that mean, inheritance? We do understand, I mentioned this earlier, my class earlier, Torah isn't an inheritance. Really, it's not. In other words, a person raised in a religious family doesn't mean all their kids are going to stay on the path. Some may veer off. They have to claim their own path, so to speak. Could be their father's a rabbi, the rabbis throughout the generations, and he said, no, I'm going to be a banker, lawyer, do other things. Maybe they'll go OTD, they'll go off the derech, they don't want to be religious at all. It's their choice. What does that show? It shows that Torah is not an inheritance. A person can have the greatest yichus, the greatest lineage. Or my Rebbe's mother would say, you know what lineage is? You know what yichus is? Just add an extra zero. That's all it means. It just means you're more obligated because you come from a greater line, right? If we go back, number of generations, most Jews will have, probably great rabbinic authorities, in their family somewhere. Somewhere 2 generations back, 3 generations back, whatever it is. We all have the merit of our forefathers, right? I don't think there's any question. So that being the case, though, it's not inheritance. It's not a guarantee. Send him to the base, the best yeshivas, be from the best family. Is that a guarantee? No, right? So the Torah really is not an inheritance, but in this case, when someone is a rabbi of a synagogue, and the rabbi retires, right? Or the rabbi dies, let's say. Who is the likely successor of the rabbi of that synagogue? The likely successor is, if he has a son, right? He has a son who's also a rabbi, he's most likely the likely successor. And if that is the case, and he has the ability to do so, he'll be given first chance. You can tell me, why would they take the rabbi's son? Let them take someone who's better, greater. Maybe they'll do that, right? But in general, when it comes to rabbinic leadership, there are many places like this that only people in their own family teach this. The Mir Yeshiva, very famous for that, right? All the Finkels, they're all related, right? It's a whole family, it's a family business, right? So to speak. Rav Nachum Partzovitz, one of the previous head of the yeshiva before Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, right? He was married to a Finkel, right? As far as I remember. So even people didn't have the same last name, they married into the family, right? And family had positions. That's how it works, right? I'm not saying in every single place, but a lot of places work that way. Now, in this case, so if the rabbi dies, or the rabbi steps down, the rabbi retires, who's the most likely successor? The most likely successor is his son. He's the most likely successor. And that's leadership. Even if it gets passed down that way, it doesn't matter. That's leadership. And not only that, there's a Talmudic dictum that says because of this blemish on the soul of a convert, technically they do not inherit. There are no laws of inheritance by a convert, technically speaking. If a convert would die, anyone can grab their property, technically speaking. Now, obviously, if they make a will, they give it over to their kids, even if they did convert. Really, we mentioned last week they have a physical connection to the parents, but they don't have a spiritual connection. They're considered like different entities, like a newborn child. But obviously, they write up a proper document where the children are going to inherit. Even technically, their biological doesn't matter, right? But if they write up such a document, it's good, right? It's a good document. But technically speaking, if a convert dies, anyone should be able to grab the property. Why? Because there are no laws of inheritance by them. So therefore, there's another major issue here, right? Again, we're not going to go into all the details. But there is another major issue of inheritance. And if there's an inheritance by a Jew, by a rabbi in this case, that works by him, but doesn't work by a convert, right? It's not going to work by them. That's another issue, right? And again, so my Rebbe says in all these cases, even if a convert is not taken, and maybe they feel rejected, they feel denied, right? It's a normal thing, right? Definitely could be a normal thing, no question. Let's say I'm just disqualified. What? Based on this technicality, you're not going to take them? So what is the answer? He says you got to explain to them this has nothing to do with a personal thing. This is not a personal vendetta. We're not out to discriminate against non-Jews, right? We're not out to put them in their place. We're not out there to say this, that, and the other thing. There are things, non-Jews in the process of conversion, they are going to find out. They move into a Jewish community. They're going to find out no one's really rolling out the red carpet, right? Maybe it's a little bit easier by some. Maybe it's more difficult by others. But no one's, rolling out the red carpet. It's a hard process for a reason, right? We're not interested in bringing in the masses. We're not interested in watering it down. We want people, in my language, going to be the real deal, right? So there is a technicality over here that we mentioned last week, and I got a lot of flack for it, and I'll probably still get a lot of flack for it, because, again, it's not politically correct to say. But there's an issue of lineage. There's a blemish, and it's brought down. There are other reasons. I'm not saying that's the only reason, right? It's one of many varied reasons, right? But we mentioned in detail, last week. Now, comes along Moshe Feinstein, one of the Torah giants, the Torah giant of the last generation in America, according to everybody. Moshe Feinstein, Igros Moshe, Eurodea, part 4, number 26, response to 26, also asked this question. Also asked the question, can a convert have a leadership position? Now listen to what he says over here. What did we say before? We said before, what does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me we have a technicality. You cannot place a king over yourself, someone who's a foreign man, not your brother. So technically we'd say no leadership position. Comes along Moshe Feinstein, we all should have asked this question. And the question is, isn't there a mitzvah v'ahavta es hager? Isn't there a mitzvah to love the convert? It says many times you're not allowed, to make fun of them. You're not allowed to remind them of their past. It's like about tshuva, someone who returns to Judaism. You can't remind them what they did in their past, right? God says widows and converts, you make fun of them, you say things against them, God is going to fight against you, right? So if you ever wanted to have a good reason why never to say anything bad about a convert, doesn't matter why, right? You want to have a good reason why not to, because God takes up their cause, because they don't have family. They don't have family who's going to take up their cause. Right? They may not have any other Jews to take up their cause. God says, I know their plight. I know how much they suffer. I'm going to take up their cause personally. So I would venture to say, I don't think anyone wants to deal with that. Not in any way, shape, or form. And a widow also. Widow has to, raises their kids, doesn't have a husband, can totally get taken advantage of in many different ways. God says, I'll see to it there won't be issues. You don't want to start up with a widow either. Not that you should. Logically, it makes sense. You should never do that. Right? And starting up with a convert or about tshuva, same thing. But Moshe Feinstein says, we mentioned this technicality. There's a technicality over here. So what about the mitzvah to love the converts? What about the mitzvah? V'ahavta es hager. So what does Moshe Feinstein say? An unbelievable novelty here. What does Moshe Feinstein say? All these technicalities, forget what I just said. Forget for the last 40 minutes what I just said. Knock it out. He knocks the whole thing out in one line. And he says, since it's a mitzvah to love the converts, all these things we just said don't apply. So that means the convert, we don't have to come on to any other answers. Convert can be in the Sanhedrin, right? Sorry, a convert can be in a rabbinical court, even if his mother's not Jewish, right? Could be on the Sanhedrin, right? It's a mitzvah to love them. If they're qualified, right? They're qualified, you take them. Not a problem. Not an issue. Knocks it out. Knocks out the prohibition altogether. Now, then he asks another question. What about the idea of being the head of yeshiva? What about this idea of a leadership position? Now, a head of a yeshiva does have power, right? He has power to accept or deny any student. He has that power, right? He can accept who he wants. He can throw out anybody he wants if he feels, that it's having a bad effect or whatever. 100%, he has that ability. That's a leadership position. Comes along Moshe Feinstein and says, no. Why is that not a leadership position? It's not a leadership position because what's his job? What essentially is his job? He might be a fundraiser. Maybe that's the main job. He may have to travel around the world to raise funds, right? But that might be secondary. His main job is to educate. His main job is to teach. It may be a glorified fundraiser, true. That may very well be true. But his main thing is to teach. So even if you tell me, says Moshe Feinstein, even if you tell me that he's got the ability to accept and deny students, and make the yeshiva the way he wants, right, and set it up however he wants, that seems to be a power, leadership position. But his position really is being a teacher. If his position is really being a teacher, that's not called leadership in this case. It is to a certain extent, but not this case. And therefore, he says it's okay. So what does it come out? So it comes out we have a difference of opinion over here. Right? The vast majority of rabbinical authorities are going to say it's based on the technicality. You don't knock out the technicality unless they are more qualified than anyone else. Right? That would be the mainstream, I would say the mainstream position. And the other position is, if it's not really a position of leadership, like Moshe Feinstein wants to say, even my Rebbe wants to say, by someone who gives classes in a yeshiva, right? The case is that he's teaching, right? He's teaching, even though it's leadership, they're taking him based on knowledge, based on his fear of heaven. Even if he can throw out a kid, even if he's got that type of power, it doesn't matter, right? It's only a leadership position in the sense that he's teaching, right? But it's not, it's not real leadership in that case. Moshe Feinstein said. So to be a head of a yeshiva, Moshe Feinstein said, not an issue. Maybe might disagree, right? And say that is really a leadership position, right? But they would both agree. They would both agree that certainly someone who teaches in a yeshiva, that should be okay. Why? Because that's essentially their teaching. That's all they're doing. And it's based on, it's based on their knowledge. It's based on their fear of heaven, right? So again, I would say that the mainstream position is that really based on the technicality. Number of these things should be forbidden, right? That the teaching yeshiva should be okay. Sitting on a rabbinical court should be an issue, right? Thoroughly should be an issue. But if they are more qualified than other people, not a problem, right? Rosh Yeshiva might also be a difference of opinion. But in the end, teaching and having other teaching positions, whether they have the power to accept people, not accept people, they would both agree that wouldn't be an issue, right? That's not necessarily called leadership, and across the board, that should not be an issue, right? So I gave you a few minutes here, a few minutes to spare, right? But the by Shmai and Avtalion, we have to realize, as well, they had different positions, right? There are different opinions exactly what their positions were. But to give over Jewish law, that's not a problem, right? As long as they know what they're doing, and it would be something obvious that pretty much anyone could do. So according to them, that wouldn't be an issue for them, right? But if you're going to say it's forbidden, you put them on a rabbinical court, okay, right? But that's because that din of a Sanhedrin, it had a much more specific din, right? A much more specific law. If it had a much more specific law, then everything's going to apply, be forbidden. If it doesn't, then we said it's okay. So, that's what I would say, about that. But again, what do people take from this? People take from this, they don't hear a word I said, and they're just going to say, we are second-class citizens. Because the reality is, someone who's single wants to get married as a convert, it's going to be harder. Baal Tshuva doesn't have it so easy either, right? But there are going to be issues. There is a reality. I know someone who's, there was a day school that accepted their kids before conversion. Some will, some won't. And their kids never had play dates because they were sort of in no man's land. So what happened? Once they converted, it became easier. But you can say, but that's discrimination. You're right, there might be. Well, I'm not going to deny that, but parents have to look out for their kids. They have to educate their kids. right? So you're going to say, but after the fact, they're accepted by a rabbinical court. They have a proper conversion. You're right. They should be accepted, right? I'm going to call a spade a spade. I'm not saying what everyone does is right, not by any stretch. And there is a certain level of discrimination, even without what we spoke about. It does exist. It's a sad reality, right? Unfortunately, I don't think it's necessarily going to change, anytime soon. Sometimes it's better, sometimes not. But a person wants to get married. I'm not saying you can't get married. Plenty of people I've dealt with, they have gotten remarried and, very happy. Other people it takes longer time, shorter time, whatever it is. But, there are issues that people have to be aware of. And unfortunately, we, the Jewish people, are our own worst enemy, right? And there are certain things we don't have to take as far as we do, right? I don't believe myself and my simple complex, I don't believe that, sometimes things go, I think, too far. And that people are pushed so hard that they just say it's not worth it. I'm not going to do it. Jewish people are this, Jewish people are that. And even if they convert, they're very bitter. And I've heard a number of stories, right? And I'm not going to deny what they're saying, from what I've heard. And if they're true, they're right. They're 100% right. But it is what it is. It has to become better. I'm not going to say we're going to lay down all the laws and just make it so easy. That we're not going to do. Right? You have to have a certain standard. But most people in the process understand one major thing. They understand there's a difference between Jews and Judaism. Right? Just because Jews do something, rabbis do something, they say something, doesn't mean it's always right. Right? It could be. It could be it is. Right? But if they're out of line, they do things that are wrong, they're wrong. Right? And they have to admit that they've done something wrong. Right? But at the end of the day, we're not all welcoming. We shouldn't be all welcoming. Converts have given the Jewish people a bad name throughout the millennium. But at the end of the day, there has to be some level of standard. And once they're accepted, they're accepted. Right? They should be accepted if there are no other issues. And after the fact, once they're a Jew, they're a Jew. But again, as we mentioned, there are some limitations. And it's not going to be easy. It's definitely not going to be easy. Having kids accepted, and all that, especially if a person's a person of color, right? If they're Hispanic, it's, I'm not going to say, across the board, they're going to have an easy experience, right? Some will, some won't. And some may have a horrific experience. But no one says the person has to go through the process. No one's saying you have to actually convert, right? But you're going to say, but this is terrible. I'm not denying it. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. I've heard people have had horrific experiences, right? I'm not saying anyone should have to go through that, right? But at the same time, you have to have a chip on your shoulder a little bit, and you have to have a strong backbone. It's not for the faint of heart. That 100% is for sure, and that's why the process is what it is. Because just like in medical school, you weed out, in the first year, you weed out the first 30%. 30% get knocked out in the first year. Second year is like another 10%. And then they're left with the cream of the crop, whoever survives. So Judaism is no different, right? You want to come, this is what you have to do. And it might be painful, might be extremely painful. I'm not saying the person has to do it. I'm not saying it has to be 100% so painful, but at the end of the day, a person has to realize and have open eyes and understand 100% what they're getting themselves, into. So they don't come back to me and they say, hey, I can't believe this happened. I warned you. Things can happen. Things can happen in a nasty way also. Doesn't have to be that way. But no one, should necessarily be shocked by, the Jewish people this, Jewish people that. You're right. We should be held to a higher pedestal. That is true. We don't always do what we're supposed to do. And there are a lot of times we do things wrong and we go beyond what we should do. And that loses people. That gives people a bitter taste. And that gives people, I'm not going to say they have the right to, but that gives people the ability to blaspheme against us, yell and scream against us because we're not doing our job properly. And they're right. If they're right, then 100%. The onus is on us. We have to take responsibility. But no one should ever think the red carpet's going to be rolled out. Right? That's a mistake. That's an absolute mistake. So look at that. I did it right on the dot. You don't have to worry about giving me another hour.
Your timing was exquisite. Very nicely done.
Because you're not going to give me another hour. I'm done with this show for 2 weeks.
Hey, unless you could change your name to Tovia singer, you're pretty much limited.
But you'll never let me do it. That's the point.
I know, right? That's funny. I'm just glad the timing is actually working out now. I don't want to miss your shows, and so this new schedule, I'm glad you're able to make that work. That's really good. Very good, very good. All right, Rabbi.
So next week is going to be the holiday of Sukkot. So,
okay. So no show next week.
So I think next couple of weeks we're going to be, we're probably going to be off. But I'm not 100%, but most likely holiday starting on Monday. So we got next Sunday, and I think actually maybe just 1 week. Maybe just 1 week, not 2 weeks.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll definitely revisit that when the time comes for sure. All right. Well, have a great week, you guys. Y'all be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss anything we put up. So y'all have a great week. Shivu Tov, everybody, and Chag Sameach. Bye.